Hello there, Homeschool Nolan here to help you navigate learning in the digital age. Today I'd like to talk to you about remote learning versus homeschooling. Due to the pandemic, we've certainly seen a rise in both remote learning and homeschooling during this past year. When schools all across the country were forced to close their classrooms back in March 2020, it forced every family, whether they were ready to or not, to become homeschoolers. And when the school year reopened in the fall, most schools still only opened with remote learning. But now, after a full semester of remote learning, many families are once again evaluating remote learning versus homeschooling and which option is best for them. Now, I feel I can offer some perspective on this because my family is actually doing both. We have one child doing homeschooling and another child doing remote learning with our public school. You see, like all families, we were forced to homeschool our first grader when the pandemic hit last March. And after homeschooling him for 5 months, we decided to continue homeschooling him even when the schools reopened in the fall for remote learning. We felt that with current technology and the abundance of learning resources out there, combined with our desire to continue the curriculum we had already designed for him, that homeschooling was the right choice for him. However, we also have a 5-year-old at home who is about to enter kindergarten, and we decided instead to enroll her in public school through remote learning. So why the difference? Well, as much as I'd like to homeschool her as well, I had to admit that with me working full-time at home, my wife and I simply didn't have the bandwidth to homeschool 2 kids, especially since we were both new at it. In addition, I also had to admit that while I enjoy teaching 2nd and 3rd graders who have already begun learning how to read, I myself simply didn't have the patience and discipline to teach a 5-year-old the very basics of ABCs and counting 1 to 100. It takes different skills and abilities to teach kids of different ages, and we felt that the schools could do a better job than we could in teaching our 5-year-old. So that's why we decided it would be best for her to attend kindergarten through remote learning. Now, first I'd like to clear up the difference between homeschooling and remote learning. Homeschooling and remote learning are alike in that they both take place in the home rather than in a school building. But the difference is that in homeschooling, parents are responsible for teaching their children. It's the parents who decide what to teach and how to teach. Whereas in remote learning, the schools are responsible for teaching, and it's the schools that provide the teachers and the curriculum to teach the kids. And the schools, from what I've seen, do their best to recreate the traditional classroom environment in a computer. In a remote learning classroom, you still have 20 to 30 students being taught by a single teacher. And in our case, they also asked us parents not to sit in on the classes even though our kids were physically at home. We received emails at the beginning of the school year from our teacher asking us parents not to watch over our kids during class time. Now, I really didn't have a problem with that given that I work full-time and we were both already busy homeschooling our other child. But then we started receiving emails from our teacher telling us that our child was sometimes having trouble paying attention. And one time, she apparently got bored and left the class altogether without us even knowing. We've also received emails from time to time informing us that our child wasn't completing and turning in assignments. I talked to other friends whose kids were doing remote learning as well, and they said they'd also gotten similar notifications from their kids' teachers as well. Clearly, remote learning has its own challenges, not just for us, but for many other families as well. I think one of the main problems or challenges of remote learning is that it requires kids to spend too many hours in front of a screen. Because public schools in particular are required to provide an X number of hours of instructions per day, they are now requiring kids to sit in front of a computer or a screen almost the same number of hours per day as well. But looking into a screen is much more difficult, and I would argue unhealthier compared to sitting in a classroom. Studies show, and I think most parents intuitively know, that too much screen time can be bad for your eyes, can cause anxiety, and even problems sleeping at night. And from a learning perspective, it's simply much harder for anyone, child or adult, to concentrate on a screen. When a child is on a digital screen at home, she is surrounded by familiar and comfortable distractions, such as toys, siblings, and other electronic devices. It's simply not the same as being in a classroom with 20 or so other students and a teacher physically present, able to see all of you. At home, both your attention and body can easily wander off without a teacher noticing right away. I know our kids are growing up in a digital age, but children still need interaction with the physical world and in-person teachers. And this is much harder to do when you have 20 other students all competing for a teacher's attention in front of a computer screen. So after a semester of remote learning, I think most parents and teachers and students alike would all conclude that remote learning is nobody's first choice. Just about everyone I know would prefer in-person instruction in a classroom over remote learning. But obviously, health and safety concerns over COVID-19 have so far made it impossible for most kids to return to a physical classroom. So what about homeschooling then? With homeschooling, you could have one or two parents giving their undivided in-person attention to each child. You can also put together a curriculum that uses books, pencil, and paper instead of a computer screen as the primary tools for teaching. But homeschooling, admittedly, is still not for everyone. It requires much more time commitment from parents, and it's especially difficult for families where both parents need to work full-time. Another challenge which I've found about homeschooling is that it requires different skills and abilities to teach different grade levels and different subjects. For example, I personally enjoy teaching math and history, but admittedly, I'm not so good at maybe teaching reading or counting to a 5-year-old. I have to admit that I simply don't have the patience or the temperament to teach younger kids who are just starting out. Schools, on the other hand, can provide teachers who specialize at teaching different grade levels and different subjects. So what's a parent to do if they want something better than remote learning for their child, but the schools aren't open and they don't have the resources to homeschool? Well, another approach you can consider is a hybrid approach. We hear that word a lot these days, hybrid. But the hybrid I'm talking about is not hybrid between remote learning and in-person school, but rather between homeschooling and remote learning. So how would that work? Well, recently I've noticed that there has been a rise in the number of private virtual online schools that also offer remote learning. But the difference between these private remote learning schools and public schools is that the private schools allow you to choose different subjects a la carte, meaning you don't have to enroll full-time in every subject. So if you're like me and you don't feel adequate in teaching certain subjects like reading, you can have your child perhaps take a class through remote learning in just reading while you teach your kids other subjects you feel you're better at. Or if your kids are older and they need to learn more advanced subjects like differential equations or calculus, perhaps you and your child can now learn certain subjects together now through one of these remote learning courses. But gone is the one-size-fits-all approach where you have to pick one school, one parent or teacher to teach every subject to your kids. With a hybrid approach, you can now perhaps minimize your child's screen time each day and mix the online versus the in-person to make sure that they get the best instruction in different subjects. We still live in a world of limited resources, and unfortunately, the pandemic has made the precious resource of good teachers even more limited. And digital technology, as good as it is, still cannot fully replace a good in-person teacher, either in the home or in the classroom. But instead of trying to recreate the physical classroom on computers, we should instead now just focus on learning. This means being flexible to use whatever virtual classes or homeschooling resources are available out there that are available to us. We all hope that schools across the country will open up again soon. But there can no longer and should no longer be a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to learning. Some kids who are disciplined and motivated enough have and will actually do quite well under remote learning. But others, unfortunately, will continue to struggle. Other kids will do better under homeschooling. But again, not every family is ready for homeschooling. But regardless of your situation, every parent should now be aware that there are different available options now. And they should be willing to blend, to be creative and blend different approaches to their child's learning. I hope this has been helpful if you too have been wondering about remote learning versus homeschooling and versus other options. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.